Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today, we'll tell you about a course at Marquette that's teaching young people how to disagree and debate civilly. Then, we'll learn about sea lamprey in the Great Lakes and how they nearly wiped out commercial fishing.
Each one will kill about 40 pounds of Great Lakes fish. So when you already have a stressed fishery, adding that pressure to it was more than the fishery could bear.
Plus, we'll explore why so many people in the Midwest wait to pull off for gas until they see a sign for Kwik Trip.
To someone who's not from here, it might seem like kind of a weird thing that we have this devotion to what looks like just a chain gas station. So we wanted to see what about Kwik Trip is particularly Wisconsin and learn a bit more about its history.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us today. College instructors are facing quieter classrooms. Few questions, little debate between students, and not much feedback. Educators place some blame on the pandemic and virtual learning. Others point to social media. This class of college freshmen were born around 2006, so it's safe to say they've seen their fair share of people fighting online. Dr. Amelia Zerker is trying to correct that. She launched a civic discourse curriculum 3 years ago to help teach students how to disagree with one another. WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel spoke with her about the program and how disagreements about campus speech are taking shape.
Post-COVID, we certainly have thought a lot about, and also in our particular media landscape, where students are more and more online and less in person. So, it's hard to sort out what the pandemic did and what is just kind of the evolving media world that we're all in, media ecology that we're all in, what the differences there are. But in those spaces, we have definitely noticed that students aren't as interactive maybe as they had been in the past, and as willing to disagree, as willing to kind of dive into issues where they might expect disagreement. And often that gets framed very early as conflict rather than just exploration, curiosity, getting to know each other, and sitting with difference and thinking about how to talk through it, with it, around it, to engage right in it. So that was part of the issue. Also, one of the most interesting things about administration is you can really think about ways that education is meeting our social needs and ways that maybe we should be doing a better job. And I think it's indisputable that our public space, our civic space, is not healthy right now in some ways, right? It still does some things well, but anger is a really viral emotion. When you're in a media space where profit's really important, you're going to be foregrounding things that sell, that transmit really quickly. And so we've gotten into this space where polarization, as we all know, is a huge problem, where civic discourse is often not collaborative, and it's often not about solving problems. It's more about getting more likes, more hits, more attention, getting followers to follow you and click, right? So I think we had both the particular goal of serving students where they are now coming out of the pandemic and in our media landscape, but also thinking about how we contribute to the public sphere in a more robust way.
Oh, that's really interesting. And so how do you bring people out of their shell and be comfortable disagreeing without giving someone carte blanche to be inflammatory, hateful? How do you teach that? How do you go about teaching that in 2025?
I honestly think that students don't think of school as a place where they'd even consider, in most cases, being inflammatory and hateful. That doesn't mean that people don't say hurtful things all the time. We all do that. And, part of this is really helping students not to associate identity with what people say in conversation. Right? So people say wrong things all the time. We screw up, we change our minds. So it's part of that. But I would say that they don't, we haven't really struggled with hatefulness very much in this class. That hasn't really been an issue. They're really well ready, again, to empathize and feel respect. The hard part comes when they realize that that's actually a very rigorous activity, that you can't just be nice and open your ears and then empathy and respect just come. That actually, to really feel that from someone else, the person has to really hear you and know you. Right. So empathy and respect are easy if it's just a matter of 4 sentences that you hear from something and you're like, yeah, from somebody, and you think, yeah, that's great. I empathize with you and I totally respect you. But, when you get down to the real underneath, you have to actually really engage to get to that space. So that's part of it. But I would say that the most important thing that we can do to help students get to a place where they're having actually constructive dialogue is to practice skills. And I think that that's counterintuitive. People, it's like kids say they're not math people. They also say, oh, I'm just an introvert, or I'm not really good at conflict, or I'm not really good at, those kinds of conversations. And again, what we want to say from the beginning is nobody is, right? We all learn. These are really fundamental skills that we don't get taught a lot of the time. And so we all have to learn to do this. And so we do things like we do little mini debate practices at the very beginning of the semester, where students just have to take 60 seconds and disagree with each other over a point. And then it's like we time them and then we go, okay, 60 seconds more, disagree again, just for the activity of practicing that to start feeling comfortable with it.
I see what you mean there, because you're teaching someone how to not shut down, right?
If someone disagrees with you, that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning. Because imagine what you could learn, we say, from somebody that totally disagrees with you. You could learn all sorts of things, right? The person doesn't just come to that disagreement from nowhere. They have this whole history of life experiences and perspectives, people in their lives, things that have happened to them. And so to get curious about why a person thinks that and how they came to that idea, that's a mark of enormous respect, even if you never agree. You can, right? Actually totally respect somebody and not agree with them. And that seems often quite surprising to them at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
I
things
also,
change over the
yeah.
semester.
And I would say too that there's even a more, what you said, that it's to help people not shut down. I think that's absolutely right. But I think there's also an academic aspect to that, in that very often the way we've done school for a lot of students isn't to let them follow thoughts with other people. It's more like, here's the answer, here's the content, memorize this content, learn this answer, and then give it back on a test. And so they don't associate learning with an open space without a lot of structure that they have to make. That's really important for a professional context too, right?
Yeah.
When you get into a job, it's not like people, well, some jobs, but there's a lot of work that people do where it is an open space and you figure out what that space needs.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I need to have an opinion about this. I'm actually being paid to
Yeah,
have an
right.
opinion about this and to make this work better. Yeah. What types of like, can you give a couple examples of the issues? I'm trying to picture how you
Yeah.
start a session and it's like, okay, today we're going to solve Medicare fraud.
Oh,
Like
yeah, no.
what?
That's actually a great question. I think so the first time that I ever taught this course was in fall 23 with my colleague Amber Wachowski, who's now gone to Madison. We were the two that first cooked up this full idea and wrote the grant together. And we did start way too big. We would say things like we would have a debate, deliberation on social inequality. I mean, we would say like,
Oh, great.
yeah. So what should we do about the fact that some people are making more and more and more money? What should we do? And we would have given them quite a bit of content. They watch TED Talks. They listen to podcasts as part of class. They read a lot of media, a lot of different media, things like Atlantic articles and stuff like that. So they have the ideas to give them stuff that they can use to have these conversations. But still, they were way too big. And we realized that the most important part of these debates and deliberations is that what should we do? We had to frame them in such a way that they could enter into them as part of the we pretty quickly. Like when you say to students, what should we do? Instant about social inequality, it turns very quickly into that, well, they should do this, and they should do that, because they don't think of themselves as people solving that right now, right? So here's a good example. This is one of the questions that they actually voted on to discuss and had a brilliant discussion on. It was, what should we do about the drinking age? And they were so thoughtful. and interesting on this. And that was because this is a topic they know about. They've heard adults talking about it. They've been talked to about it. It's something that they're really invested in. And so they had a lot of really interesting thoughts about, whether it was a good idea to lower it. They started getting into questions about, in all the groups did, because I have the transcripts, into, well, but you can be in the military, but you can't drink. What they looked at things like what they do in Germany about the drinking age. So they got really thoughtful and interesting. That would be a great example. Another one would be artificial intelligence. And we had a great deliberation on what should we do about the increasing prevalence of AI partners, romantic partners. And they were completely fascinated by that, right? And had many
I
different
bet.
thoughts about whether that be a good idea or a bad idea, we had a case on freedom of expression. And so we talked a lot about what should we do about controversial speakers on campus. And what should we as a university community do? But then the we there becomes really multifaceted, because they would think about, the administrator's perspective, faculty's perspective, undergraduate students, graduate students, staff, custodians, right? There's so many different things to think about when you consider who that we is that they're part of and what we as a university should do. So those are examples, if that helps.
It absolutely does help. You touched on freedom of expression, but I think we're having this conversation in a time where people are really considering freedom of expression on campus. I mean, Charlie Kirk was shot in one of these very high profile kind of debate me, prove me wrong type of scenarios that some colleges and universities have kind of banded together to not have on campus. I mean, I'm not sure that you've had any conversations with students in this class about this, but like, how do you look at this as someone who's trying to protect free speech and expression, but also thoughtful civic discourse?
Yeah. One of the topics that I've taught every single semester that I've taught this course is hate speech, because it's so fascinating to students that it is illegal in most democracies, but not in ours. And just thinking about why that is and what the pros and cons are of legislating against hate speech is really, really interesting, and starts helping people see the complexity of this. I would say that a couple things. This course is founded on what we in political science language call ill-structured problems, by which we mean simply problems that are really hard to solve. The polarization is really a almost absurd simplification in almost every case, right? That's not really how we get to solutions. We pick these ill-structured problems because just as important as learning these skills is making sure that we practice them in a space where we respect the complexity of problems and we understand that there's no way to take a position easily, right? There's no easy position ever. There's no position that we can just defend that we know is quickly right or wrong, which isn't to say that there's not kind of ethical lines that we want to find. But part of that is finding those ethical lines and thinking, okay, this is what I won't cross, but these are all the spaces where I would step across, right? And that takes a lot of discernment, to use a Jesuit word. It takes a lot of thought. It takes a lot of input from other people. And so freedom of speech is about making space for all the speech, to me. And I think that's part of what we're really trying to teach in this class. And sometimes that means speech we don't like. Sometimes that means very polarized speech. But really what we're talking about when we think about an ecosystem that is governed by a belief in freedom and a commitment to freedom of speech, it's about a really pluralist, multivocal discourse. And I think what we're trying to do here again is teach the skills, not for one side versus another side, but for a really multi-partial discourse. And that is freedom of speech.
Dr. Amelia Zerker is the director of the honors program at Marquette University and launched the school's civic discourse curriculum. She spoke with WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel. Did you know you can listen to Like Effect as a podcast? Search for Like Effect wherever you get your podcasts to download and listen on demand. Later in the show, we'll talk about Kwik Trip and how the gas station chain became a beloved Midwest institution. But first, we'll learn about the sea lamprey, the vampire fish that nearly destroyed the Great Lakes ecosystem, and how federal funding cuts could herald its return. Keep listening to Like Effect on WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. For more than a century, an invasive species has been literally sucking the life out of the Great Lakes. They're known as sea lampreys. After nearly decimating commercial fishing operations in the early 20th century, a management program was created to keep the lampreys at bay. And it's been successful. The numbers of sea lampreys have been reduced by 90% since the program first began. But the work has been ongoing, and now cuts to the federal program are threatening that progress. Journalist Katie Thornton tagged along with some of the people doing this work, and wrote about it for The New Yorker. She joins Lake Effect's Joy Powers, along with Mark Gaydon, the executive secretary of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, whose work was featured in the piece.
How would you describe a lamprey?
It's an exotic species, an invasive species, and it's long and snake-like, looks like an eel. It's not an eel, but it looks like one. Completely cartilaginous, so no bones. It doesn't have a jaw, but it has an alien-like suction cup mouth that's ringed with hundreds of teeth, and then a sharp razor-like drill tongue in the middle. So when the lamprey attaches to a fish, the tongue will flick out, drill through the scales and skin of the fish, and feed off of the fish's blood and body fluids. So it's very much something out of a horror movie. Probably Halloween is its favorite time of year because the lamprey are just, something that only a mother could love.
They're quite frightening looking. The mouth is definitely this sort of the culmination of all the things that are fearful about the fish, and fearsome about the fish. I mean, it really is just over 100 teeth in these sort of concentric circles within the mouth of this fish. And, over the course of my reporting on the Sea Lamprey Control Program, I had an opportunity to latch one onto my hand. And, it was something I am very grateful to do once, and to feel the sheer sort of power of these fish. They suction onto the fish at a power that's, 4 times as powerful as a normal vacuum. They suction onto the fish.
You're a fish. You're not going to have a lot of luck shaking it off, frankly. And you had to break the seal, right? I mean, to actually get the lamprey off of you. Again, it's not feeding. It's just grabbing onto something to keep from wriggling onto the ground.
Right.
But if you leave it on a little bit too long, it'll leave quite a mark, put it that way. But it's more because the suction cup mouth is just digging and pulling harder toward your skin there. And you literally need to break the seal. And sometimes you can't break it fast enough. You're like, ah.
Yeah, you need a thumb to do that. You need to really
right.
pinch the mouth of the lamprey to get it off of you, which a fish doesn't have that benefit.
No.
I definitely showed a picture of lamprey to my colleagues when pitching this story. Everyone in the room, not a squeamish bunch, very, very terrified of this little animal. These, of course, are invasive lamprey in the Great Lakes that we're talking about. How did they first end up in the Great Lakes system?
They made their way in through man-made shipping canals, so they swam their way into the Great Lakes. They're native to the Atlantic Ocean, and the first conduit into the Great Lakes was the Erie Canal, celebrating an anniversary, actually. It was one of the greatest engineering feats of its time, and it connected the Hudson River in New York to Buffalo and went through northern New York. The Erie Canal was the pathway for these species. The lamprey made it past Niagara Falls about 1920 and had free access to the rest of the Great Lakes Basin. Swam their way into Lakes Huron and Michigan about 1935, 1936, and were seen finally in Lake Superior by 1939. And they spawn in streams. There are abundant streams throughout the Great Lakes Basin that are perfect lamprey spawning habitat. And then they're not all that picky about the fish that they eat either. So it was an open buffet, all the spawning you want, just a recipe for disaster.
Well, and it seems that's exactly what happened, a bit of a disaster. What were the conditions like in the Great Lakes that really spawned this program, pun not intended, to eradicate them from the Great Lakes?
Well, when the lampreys invaded, the fishery was actually already on the ropes. So it was the late 1800s when surveys between Canada and the United States were beginning to catalog the decline of the fishery. So human activity since the time of European colonization was pretty intense when it comes to the fisheries. By the late 1800s, it was an overly industrialized commercial fishing operation. You had more and more intensively lethal gear that the fishers were using, the ability through transportation networks to ship the product to farther and farther locations, and pollution. We started seeing pollution coating fish spawning reefs like sawdust from the lumbering industry, as an example. And the scientists at the time were documenting a significant decline in some of the species that were the mainstay of commercial fishing, lake trout and sturgeon, whitefish. Atlantic salmon was the first to go. Was native to Lake Ontario, and the state of the fishery was pretty dire. But the lamprey was the proverbial kind of straw that broke the camel's back. It was a stressed fishery to begin with, and this was just adding fuel to the fire. The lamprey, each one will kill about 40 pounds of Great Lakes fish. So when you already have a stressed fishery, adding that pressure to it was more than the fishery could bear.
Yeah, I believe there was a stat in Dan Egan's book that said the trout harvest in Lake Michigan alone went from 6 million pounds, which, as Mark said, was already taxed from previous years, from 6 million pounds in 1944 to zero in 1954, due largely to the lampreys.
This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers, and I'm speaking right now with Mark Gaydon. He's the Executive Secretary of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. We're also joined by journalist Katie Thornton, who wrote about the ongoing efforts to remove invasive sea lampreys from the Great Lakes. Katie, your story was very descriptive of the messy work that is lamprey removal. Can you tell us a bit about that, what that looks like on the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. For this story in the New Yorker, I had the opportunity to get out with some of these crews who are doing the on-the-ground work of controlling the lamprey population, of rooting out the invasive sea lampreys. And it is a very involved process. I mean, so often I think we hear about federal workers or federal programs, and we don't necessarily know, if you haven't seen it firsthand, you don't necessarily know what it takes to do this work that gets so easily sort of summed up or mentioned in passing. Controlling the sea lamprey is a massive, massive project. As Mark mentioned, they spawn in streams. And so these crews who, are made up of both US and Canadian federal workers. These crews are getting out in everything from tiny sort of highway side trickles to massive urban river systems. And there's multiple ways that the sea lamprey population are controlled, but the main part of the operation is a lampricide, a very highly selective pesticide that has minimal effects on other fish and does a very good job of killing the sea lamprey and sort of leaving the rest of the ecosystem intact. Mark could talk about this with much greater detail, but it was discovered at a lab in the northern part of the Lower Peninsula of Michigan in the 1950s after years and years of trial and error trying to find a chemical compound that would kill the lampreys without killing the surrounding ecosystems. And eventually that was discovered and put into place. And it was effective quite quickly, within 2 decades of beginning to do these treatments in these streams, the fishery was really coming back to life. And so when I learned about this process, I really wanted to see what does that look like in practice. It takes a lot of highly specialized labor. You have folks who have pesticide application licenses. It requires round-the-clock application and monitoring. You have to hit the stream with a very specific concentration of this toxin for 9 straight hours. You can't go under or it won't be lethal to the lamprey. You can't go over the concentration or it might run the risk of hurting other things. And so there's a lot of very specific application, monitoring, a lot of physical work, getting in the water, wading into the rapids, collecting samples, bringing it back to these sort of mobile chemistry labs that are set up in trailers around the area, monitoring the concentration, and a lot of planning as well. These river systems are intricate, they're snaking, you have multiple tributaries flowing to a main stream. You have to sort of hit them all at a very specific time. It's almost like a game of Pac-Man. You have to sort of flood the lampreys in every avenue they could go so that they don't just scurry into another stream and avoid the toxin. And it really it's a very highly strategic, highly coordinated, very labor-intensive effort. I was out on an overnight shift with some of these folks who were applying the lampricide, as it's called, and I very quickly noticed there's not so much as a camp chair, in these labor sites. It's really there's no opportunity to even really sit down.
It does seem like it's very involved work that involves a lot of expertise. One of the elements of your story, of course, is about funding, and we'll get to that in a minute. But who are the people who are doing this work? Who are the kinds of people who are capable of doing this work?
Some of these people have been part of the program for many, many years. It's a very effective, as Katie noted, in what they do. And these people are extremely dedicated to the work that they do. They're aware that the lampricide applications and the sea lamprey control program is the mainstay of the fishery. And they're very proud of the fact that if they didn't do what they were doing, we would have no fishery to speak of. And in fact, COVID, where the lamprey control, which again, as Katie said, out in the field and labor intensive, where it was curtailed for a couple of years because of travel restrictions, the lampreys bounced back very, very quickly. We just published a paper that demonstrated the really how quickly they bounce back. It's like a coiled spring. As long as you keep your thumb on it, you're going to be fine. But if you take your foot off the gas, they're going to spring back pretty fast and pretty uncontrolled, to mix metaphors there. These are people who are highly trained. As Katie said, they have a license to do what they do. Some of them as well just have deep expert knowledge, like they know these streams like the back of their hand and can apply that deep knowledge to what they do. It is effective. What they do is reduce the lamprey populations by about 95% throughout the Great Lakes Basin, and probably exceeded the expectations wildly of the people who put this program into motion in the mid 1950s. Katie spent a few days with the crews. I've spent almost 30 years working in this program, and I still never cease to be amazed how dedicated these people are and really how effective they are. What a relatively small amount of people, by the way. You're talking about maybe 40 people who contribute to a $5.5 billion Great Lakes fishery. It's amazing.
Katie, as with many things in our nation today, the federal government is slashing funding for many of the people involved in this work. What is that looking like right now? What is the funding looking like right now?
Sure. I was interested in the sea lamprey control program just as somebody who lives in a Great Lakes state, as somebody who grew up in a Great Lakes state. And earlier this year, after what has come to be known in federal worker circles as the Valentine's Day Massacre, when many federal workers were laid off unceremoniously, the lamprey program was among the programs that initially got hit. They weren't able to hire seasonal workers due to a government-wide hiring freeze, and seasonal workers are sort of the backbone of the treatment program. And there were layoffs of probationary workers, as there were in multiple different government agencies. The Fisheries Commission and others and constituents in the Great Lakes state were ultimately able to get a lot of that funding back, which is a really remarkably impressive feat. It perked my ears up at the beginning of this year, wondering what happens when you do sort of cut these programs. It's easy to see a headline that says different federal workers, these different federal programs have been cut. I really wanted to know what that looks like on the ground. Thankfully, the lamprey control program was able to restaff with some delays and some scaling back. They were able to get out there and treat this season, which is really important because what was learned during COVID was that if you roll back these programs for even just a season, these invasive species that tank economies, that dramatically alter fisheries, they come roaring back very, very quickly. And maybe I'll let Mark talk a little bit more about the sort of ongoing funding.
Yeah, it's been a rough year for sure. And that's for all the things Katie said, it was personnel issues. And again, these are highly trained people who are specialized. So if they are not hired, the seasonals in the first place, or if we have people taking the early outs that were offered to federal employees or just outright fired, it becomes a problem because we rely on that expertise and that very specialized work of these people to do what we do. It turned out not to be as much of a money issue as it turned out to be a staffing issue. And a lot of the people that we relied upon to do this took the retirements or were encouraged to leave their jobs. We lost probably about 350 years of combined experience by people who were kind of late career that took the offers that the administration offered. And as we go into 2026, we kind of managed to pace together enough crews to do the work in 2025, which was very good. In 2026 going forward, we still have unanswered questions about the gaps in the program given the loss of personnel that we've had. The president's budget included full funding for the sea lamprey control program, and Congress has provided, for what we've seen so far, full funding for the control program. And we had members of Congress from both parties, very, very supportive. And that was very heartening. They went to bat, talked to the Interior Secretary, talked to the powers that be, and really did a lot of work to help so that we didn't have a gap in the control program. I'm cautiously optimistic, given the funding that's been provided, that we'll continue to see that political support and be able to move forward in 2026 fully staffed. But there's still a lot of work to do and a lot of unknowns.
We will see what the future holds for the lamprey and the Great Lakes. Katie, Mark, thank you both so much for joining us here on Lake Effect.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having us, Joy.
Mark Gaydon is the Executive Secretary of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. Katie Thornton is a Peabody Award-winning journalist whose piece on sea lamprey was recently featured in The New Yorker. They both joined Lake Effect's Joy Powers. Beavers are back in Milwaukee.
It kind of parallels the return of otters to the area too. So the beaver sighting started with one, and then a couple years later another one, and then they started becoming regular, and that's what's happening now with otters.
We'll tell you about the rodents' return to Milwaukee's waterways in about 10 minutes. But first, ever found yourself waiting to exit the highway until you see a sign for Kwik Trip? We'll learn why so many Wisconsinites often favor Kwik Trip over other gas station chains. That's next on Lake Effect on WUWM. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. We all pick favorites. There's favorite shows, books, but how about a favorite gas station? For many in the Midwest, it's Kwik Trip. The gas station chain has over 900 locations across the Midwest and has created a cult-like following. But why? What's the big deal with Kwik Trip? Archer Marquette is the managing editor at Milwaukee Magazine, and he explored that question for this month's cover story. He joins Lake Effect's Excrit Nunez to talk about the history of Kwik Trip and what makes it so successful.
There's a lot to dig into in this month's cover story, but I want to start by asking why you decided to focus on the origins of Kwik Trip. How did this story idea come up?
Yeah, we'd been thinking about doing something about Kwik Trip for quite a while. To someone who's not from here, it might seem like kind of a weird thing that we have this devotion to what looks like just a chain gas station. Because, there are other chain convenience stores that also inspire followings sort of nationwide. An obvious example recently is Buc-ee's. In Philadelphia, there's Wawa. So we wanted to see what about Kwik Trip is particularly Wisconsin and learn a bit more about its history. And then also, it made perfect sense to do it this year because it's their 60th anniversary since the first store opened.
So tell me more. Where and how did Kwik Trip start? Was it always this gas station / convenience store?
It sort of started as more of just a grocery store, but a really small one. So in 1965, in Eau Claire, the first Kwik Trip opened. John Hansen and his wife Donna were operating that first store. They went into business with a local company called Gateway Foods, and that was sort of how the guy who eventually became very much the face of Kwik Trip, Don Zietlow, got involved. He sort of grew up as a farm kid near there. And then he started working for Gateway Foods, and he worked his way up, eventually becoming president of the company. But when Gateway's owner, D.B. Reinhardt, got involved with this nascent first Kwik Trip location in Eau Claire, that was what sort of brought Don into contact with Kwik Trip. Some of the folks at Kwik Trip that I interviewed for this story, according to them, Don was giving a presentation at a conference for grocery store owners. And he was telling them sort of this pitch about big box stores are coming in and they're going to put you out of business because they're doing more than you're doing. They're selling more than you're doing. You're going to have to get smaller. You're going to have to become closer to what was then being termed a convenience store, which was still relatively a new business. And according to the story, one of the people in the room said something along the lines of, well, if you know so much, why don't you buy my store? And I guess Don took the challenge and said, yeah, okay. And then he went through with it. He bought the store and then approached the Hansons and D.B. Reinhardt, the owner of Gateway Foods, about folding that into the Kwik Trips that had already opened at the time, which I believe at the time were 6 total, all very small, all around Eau Claire. And they entered into an agreement together to split ownership amongst each other and run the new chain, which was just beginning.
Wow, that's all really interesting. What did you learn from the people that you spoke with? Why is Kwik Trip so popular today?
Yeah, there's a lot of different factors. Kwik Trip has a fresh food program that it launched in the mid-2000s at the time that when gas stations were really suffering from the decline in cigarette sales. That was sort of a cornerstone across the industry for years. And when that went down, Kwik Trip decided that it was going to be a place for fresh food. So they ended up sort of building out this really impressive within the industry vertical integration. So if you don't know, Kwik Trip owns dairy, it owns its own bakery, it owns all these production facilities, largely in La Crosse, where it makes a bunch of the food that you buy at Kwik Trip. And then all the things that they make at their own production facilities are transported by Kwik Trip drivers. They go through 2 Kwik Trips, they're sold at Kwik Trips, and this allows the company to hold sort of control over everything. They can make sure that every location is getting the same sort of level of service, which you're not necessarily going to get at the big chains. And so that sort of consistency is a big part of it. And the uniqueness of having their own branded food sort of sets it apart. Another huge thing, this is something that came up whenever I talk to just like fans of Kwik Trip and ask them why they care about this place so much, why they would go to it over other places. It's customer service. Kwik Trip really prides itself on being sort of a step above other convenience stores when it comes to the way employees treat people. One very noticeable aspect of that is every time you leave, they're going to say, see you next time. That's something that every person who works at Kwik Trip is trained to say. That's part of what they're trying to do to sort of make the experience as pleasant as possible for people. And a lot of that also has to do just on the business end with more competitive pricing. I spoke to a professor at UW-Madison who explained that when people go to Kwik Trip, they're not just paying for, say, a coffee or a donut. They're paying for coffee in a clean, well-lit store where everyone's going to be nice to them and they're going to get in and out quickly, not stuck in a long line. So that level of convenience and friendliness is a huge part of it. And the friendliness also is one of the sort of Wisconsin aspects of it. It's something that they play up a lot in their marketing too, the idea of sort of being a Midwest nice place. They definitely want to sort of market themselves as having a certain sort of small business feel, which obviously can be a little bit ironic because they have, I believe, over 900 locations. I think they just hit 900 earlier this year.
So big theme is quality control and customer service. And you mentioned a couple of names. I was wondering if you could tell me about who previously and currently runs the company. What did you learn about them?
Yeah, so Don Zietlow, who I mentioned earlier, has really been the face of Kwik Trip since he became sole owner. Well, the Zietlow family did in 2000. He retired in 2022, and the company was taken over by his son, Scott. But he's very much carried it in the same direction for the past 3 years. One thing that came up when we started reporting on this that's pretty well known, at least among folks who are politically minded, is Don Zietlow is well known as a Republican donor. He's donated, I believe, over $1 million in total to different Republican causes, both at the state level and nationally. He's donated to, I think, a Trump election PAC, some of the local gubernatorial races, things like that. And for folks of the other political persuasion, that's definitely rubbed them the wrong way and has occasionally sort of been attributed to Kwik Trip. I asked the folks at Kwik Trip about that because that reputation is something that you'll find online or even just talking to people about it. And they were kind of quick to point out that Don's donations were his private donations. They weren't company money. The company has given some money to the legislative committees, both on the left and the right, with a bit more going to the right. But it's nowhere near Don's private donations. And then one thing that the folks I talked to at the company pointed out when I asked about this was that Scott, who is now the CEO, Don's son, does not donate to political causes like his father did. So, the company, to an extent, sort of distances itself from that political activity. But yeah, it's certainly, if you look online about Kwik Trip, it's something that you're going to see. And yeah, it's definitely affected folks' perception of the company.
Okay, so my big question for you is, why aren't there any Kwik Trips in Milwaukee? I felt a little bit of FOMO learning about people's experiences at Kwik Trip.
Yeah, that was a big question that we had deciding to do this story. Because, yeah, there aren't any. The nearest, as of last I checked, was in West Allis. And I asked them about that. And according to them, the rationale is because they have this really big fresh food program and that requires more space. They require, I believe, a minimum of a 3-acre lot for every Kwik Trip, and according to them, that's not cost-effective in metropolitan areas. So they don't plan on opening one in Milwaukee. I mean, if you look online, folks speculate that, maybe it has something to do with their right-leaning company history, that, obviously Milwaukee's an urban center that's been blue for decades, and so folks have thought maybe that's a factor. One thing that could possibly play into it is that many Kwik Trips also sell alcohol. And Milwaukee, if I remember right, has an ordinance that prevents gas stations from also selling alcohol, which could be a factor in deterring Kwik Trip from opening within the city.
So, Archer, before we wrap up, I wanted to mention that you reviewed some Kwik Trip food items in your feature, and I thought I'd end by asking you the best thing you tried and the very worst. So let's start with the best thing.
Yeah, definitely. Probably the most fun part of the whole story. And it wasn't just me. We had a bunch of folks from the MilMag offices trying different Kwik Trip foods. But the best, in my opinion, was the maple waffle breakfast sandwich. I mean, I love a good breakfast sandwich to begin with. But yeah, this was genuinely good in a way that you wouldn't expect for something you picked up while, getting gas in the morning.
And what about the worst?
Unfortunately, I have to say the grilled cheese that we tried was not great. Very sort of coagulated, not quite the the melt factor that you want in a grilled cheese. That was probably the most disappointing of the ones we tried.
Well, Archer, thank you so much for speaking with me today and sharing your work with me.
Yeah, thank you.
Get some gas, get some snacks, grab me something I can sip. If you don't know where to go on the road, I got a tip. If you need a bit of everything, just go to Kwik Trip.
Archer Marquette is the managing editor at Milwaukee Magazine, who wrote the feature in this month's issue about Kwik Trip. He spoke with Lake Effect's Excrit Nunez.
Hover by the hot food. I'm a stuffed cheesy potato lover. If you like other stores more, you're probably glazing like some Glazers. A Midwest staple where I tend to spend some paper. You can catch me on the highway looking for the next sign. And my last cashier, you'll surely see me next time. A little bit of everything. Let's go to Kwik Trip. Get some gas, get some snacks, grab me something I can sip. If you don't know where to go on the road, I got a tip.
Bubbler Talk, quenching Milwaukee's thirst for knowledge.
I'm Eric Von Fellow Maria Peralta Arellano. In the last decade, beavers have reemerged in the Milwaukee and Menominee rivers. The large rodent was extinct locally for centuries due to hunting, urbanization, and pollution. The beaver's trouble goes back to Milwaukee's fur trade. Traders trapped beavers and sold their pelts. It caused beaver populations to plummet in the city, and they were considered locally extinct by about 1730. That brings us to the present day. Milwaukee resident Elizabeth Witt was on a hike with her son in Hubbard Park when she spotted something unexpected on the Milwaukee River.
I saw this beaver just floating along on the ice and getting in sticks and eating them. And I'm just wondering, where is he living? What is he doing?
Right there from the trail, Witt decided to send the question to Bubbler Talk. In our search for an answer about urban beavers, we met with Tim Vargo, Director of Research of the Urban Ecology Center in Mitchell Park.
And I'm not sure if we have an estimate of population numbers, but it certainly, we see them on a regular basis. They're here, they're breeding, and they have their lodges. And so it's a fun time.
Around 2013, beavers were reintroduced in the Milwaukee area. Restoration efforts improved water quality and built back some of the lost woods suitable for building beaver lodges. Conservationist groups such as the Urban Ecology Center, Milwaukee Riverkeeper, and Superior Bioconservancy have been studying and aiding the beaver's return. Being aquatic animals, the natural beaver habitat is found, you guessed it, on the river. But one might think, where are the dams? Vargo says humans took much of the prized wetland habitat that would usually be prime real estate for beavers, and the Milwaukee and Menominee rivers, which go through the city, are too large for a beaver to build a dam.
It's not the lodge above ground lodge usually in the area. It's not these above ground lodges that you're probably used to seeing. They're inside the riverbanks. They dig in.
The animals will burrow into the sides of the river to create a den with an underwater entrance to protect them from predators. Vargo says beavers create tight-knit families, with a single family living in a lodge made of branches, sticks, and mud together.
For the most part, they're monogamous, and they're going to be in their family groups. So the kits will stick around for a couple of years and kind of help around the family. So you can imagine, that a family of beavers will be working in an area for a while, and then the young will disperse. And but you can have generations living in the same lodge.
Often, when people spot a beaver, they'll see just one, and while they do enjoy solo work, it isn't unusual to have a small crew of the rodents working together to harvest large trees and dragging them back to the water. Being in a city means the rodents don't need as much protection from predators, just human interference, but their own work as natural lumberjacks leave them vulnerable. Vargo describes the large cottonwood, birch, and aspen trees surrounding much of Milwaukee's rivers as a candy shop for the beaver population.
And it's dangerous, just like with humans, you have instances of people, it's a pretty dangerous job to chop down trees and you can get severely injured or die. It's the same with beavers. They're not, there's mistakes. And so they could get seriously injured or die. So it's dangerous for them too. And so they're that's all. They're trying to stay safe. They're out doing this at night.
The rodents weigh around 70 to 80 pounds and can haul lumber far distances to ensure they are getting the required resources for survival. We walked down the trail in Three Bridges Park looking for evidence of beaver activity. We stepped off to the right of the trail, heading towards train tracks, where we found an aspen that had been cut down by a beaver.
But it's not near the river, so in addition to cutting this down, it had to drag the tree all the way over to the water. So you can imagine how big this tree is. It's similar, maybe a little smaller than this one, but these are pretty big. Mm-hmm. So the muscles, the incredible strength it took first to bite through this tree and then to drag it over to the river. But they'll come this far for this type of wood. They'll be fairly selective.
Do they have a limit on how far they'll go from the water?
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of diminishing returns, right? If the best case scenario is it's right by the river and so they'll take trees that are maybe less exciting to them if it's closer to the river, right? Because even though it's not my favorite tree, it's right by the river. That's going to make it easier for me. But if there's some really yummy trees farther away, they're gonna seek them out.
Their diet mainly consists of the inner bark of trees, leaves, and twigs. In order to get the job done, they rely on their insane jaw strength and sharp teeth to chomp through the wood. When looking closely at the teeth of a beaver, they appear to be long, curved, and orangey.
And you see that beavers have red teeth, and for us that would maybe indicate tooth decay, but for them it's like the opposite. It's the opposite because the redness comes from basically iron. So they have essentially metal in their teeth to keep it strong because they are going to bite trees. They're going to bite wood.
Vargo notes that the rehabilitation of natural and wild spaces in Milwaukee has led more animals beyond beavers to return home.
And it kind of parallels the return of otters to the area too. So the beaver sighting started with one, and then a couple of years later another one, and then they started becoming regular, and that's what's happening now with otters. So we have otters downtown, sightings sporadically, and we're hoping that they, their path is similar to the beavers.
There used to be an estimated 400 million beavers in the United States. While we might not see those numbers again, we can root for the small population living in Milwaukee's rivers to thrive.
Support for Bubbler Talk comes from Palermo's Pizza and Educators Credit Union. What have you always wanted to know about the Milwaukee area? Visit wuwm.com/bubblertalk to submit your question.
Bubbler Talk wraps up Lake Effect for today. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Joy Powers, Sam Woods, and Excret Nunez join me in producing Lake Effect each week with help from Rob Larry and Graham Thomas. Becky Mortensen is our executive producer. Emily Files helps edit the show. We also heard from Jimmy Gutierrez, Susan Benz, Eddie Morales, Mayan Silver, Catherine Kokel, and Maria Peralta Ariano from the WUWM News team this week. Jason Reevy is our studio engineer. Valeria Navarro Villegas is our digital operations manager. Trapper Shep wrote our theme music. If you've missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at wuwm.com. If you'd like to take us on the go, simply download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Join us again on Monday at noon when we'll discuss the use of facial recognition technology by local and federal agencies in Milwaukee. Thank you so much for joining us today, right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.